Hi again then guys, and welcome to of course another specific review from Gran Turismo Sport's Day 1 roster, and this is a car which we've kind of covered before, in a sense at least, not just in GT6 where obviously we covered it extensively because of how fast it was, it could be tuned up to 1000 horsepower exactly, and of course it was a DLC car. One of the standout DLCs of GT6 you could say, and I believe one of the earliest ones if I recall correctly, and of course it came alongside the pace car version as well, which was pretty much equal in terms of performance. They were both very good, they became instant hits in top speed racing lobbies around Route X, tons and tons of miles, and also great performance for a great price compared to many other actual supercars in the game as well. Now, the reason why I say that we've kind of looked at it before is more so than just GT6 though, because we have already discussed the pace car version in this game. But of course, instead of buying the pace car as we did before, now you can buy it from the mileage exchange, and occasionally of course it swaps around. Sometimes it's this, sometimes the Mercedes as well, that kind of thing. And of course there is also the Nissan pace car as well, which you win instead of buy. So there's a pretty strong selection of pace cars currently in the game, but in terms of the road version of this one in particular, is it genuinely different to the pace car in any significant way? The obvious answer being yes, of course, and we'll get into that in a second, and also just on its own merit, is the M4 worth getting? And I would say that that's actually a much more valid question now that the E92 M3 has been brought back, because before, this car kind of had the monopoly. The E30 M3 was nowhere near quick enough to be a rival, and most of the other Beamers just weren't even in the same kind of category anyway. So is this still a great car, or would you be better off getting the cheaper, which is a good start, E92? Well, that's an interesting question for a number of reasons, and for me personally, I would choose the M3 over this, but that gets into more the side of things of just personal preference rather than straight up facts, because as far as facts, I would say the M4 is likely a better car in most ways. The engine, for instance, is more efficient at what it does. It's smaller, it's more compact, it's a smaller capacity, less cylinders, turbo aspirated instead of naturally aspirated. It is more powerful, incidentally, as well, not by a huge amount, about 10 horsepower more, and it does deliver great performance. The thing that I don't like about the car so much is more just the visual style, I guess, the marketing of it, and although BMW doubtless put out some kind of press release somewhere that I just haven't read, I never understood why they called this the M4. Or why they even needed a 4 Series at all. The 3 Series is one of their most popular cars ever, so I don't really understand the rebranding there. It seems very strange, almost like if Porsche suddenly turned the 911 into the 912 for no apparent reason. It seems strange to me to do something that radical, but they're not the only company to do it. Mercedes did it as well, by deleting the CLK from their lineup, which is such a strange decision, and having the E-Class Coupe instead, which I would have definitely not thought they would ever do. For, again, the same reasons. It's such an iconic flagship of their performance range, but even more so for the M3 for BMW. It's such a strange decision to me to move to the M4. Now, of course, the car has significantly different DNA, and maybe that's one of the reasons why they wanted to do so, because the M3 was always a naturally aspirated, kind of old-school sports coupe in many ways, and that's one of the things that made it so good, even as far back as the E30, so maybe this one being so different to it in terms of the engine, the aspiration, the vibe, maybe that's why they wanted to do that. Now, I don't think that making this car was a bad choice, not by any means. I just purely would have preferred it if they called it the M3. It really is as simple as that. Maybe some slight design changes, but you could say that the M4 in a number of ways kind of set the benchmark for what BMW's attitude for their performance cars would become in the coming years, because this one, the F10 M5 as well, which I've never been as much of a fan of as the E60, and I know many of you guys aren't either, for obvious reasons, the V10 engine being one of them. But this one kind of paved the way for that new school BMW style, with the turbo-aspirated engines instead of naturally aspirated, which gives you a ton of advantages. Fuel economy, performance efficiency, as I already said, more compact, etc. But is this car actually really good? Or was it just good because there was no M3? That's the big question. And it also makes a review like this more relevant now than it ever would have been before the E92 was brought back. So how does it compare? Well, the engine is a 3 litre, 425 horsepower, so as I said, about 10 horsepower more, 406 pound-feet of torque, which is also more than the M3, not surprising for a turbo-aspirated engine. It weighs 1,497 kilos, which is undoubtedly the most significant thing about the spec sheet compared to an M3. That is a lot lighter than the M3 ever was, and the horsepower per tonne consequently is 284, which isn't mind-blowing, but it's not super lightweight. It weighs about 1.5 tons, so of course it's not going to be amazing. In terms of the category, of course it's N400, and the price tag, if you choose to buy it rather than win it, is 120,000 credits. Now we could do a rivals match between this and the M3, and we might do at some point, maybe even soon, who knows. But in terms of the spec sheet, it really does go back and forth. This one has some really good advantages. Of course it's more powerful, that's an obvious one, but I would say that the weight difference is a much more significant advantage to have, because if memory serves, I believe the E92 is something like 1,615 kilos, something like that. This one being under 1,500 is a massive difference, and that's something which very rarely happens in any kind of update. Usually vehicles get heavier with each update, especially these days because they get packed with more and more safety tech, performance tech, traction control systems, all this kind of stuff that cars didn't have before, or at least they were nowhere near as complex as they were before. So for a car like this to drop so much, because that's a huge difference, well over 100 kilos difference, that's a good advantage to have. So in effect it means that you've still got this full-size 2+2 luxury coupe with a decent size, good presence on the road, it looks the part, but at the same time, in a similar way to what Mazda did by making the MX-5 lighter than it was, this one is now nimbler despite still being a good size. They didn't just make it lighter by making it stupidly small, it's still a good size car, but you can get through corners immediately quicker even without having to actually tune it. Now if you do tune it, of course you can make it even better, you can drop the weight significantly, and also the class versatility that this vehicle has is very good. The top speed is naturally high, which it was anyway in GT6, as I mentioned. You can detune it quite comfortably to N300, you can tune it up beyond N500, so again, it's got a good level of range. Now being a Beamer, being an M Beamer especially, you would expect certain things of it when it comes to handling. Probably tail happy, for instance, at least if the M3 lineage is anything to go by. That's one of the reasons why people love it. They are great drivers' cars, great to drift with, great to take around like the Nordschleife or a country road. So can this still tick all of those boxes? Not just be a better car mathematically, but be a better car to drive? Well, to me, that is where the line blurs a little bit, because I would say that now that we have the E92, this is not as fun to drive. And I believe that there are a number of small reasons that all add up to cause that. For one thing, the engine. Is it better? Statistically, yes. But I don't find that it sounds as good. I don't find it's as passionate as the M3 was. The M3 has more of a lumpy bruiser kind of engine, whereas this one feels more proper. It feels more refined, and of course that's great, but it just doesn't feel as raw. It's not as kind of a muscle car experience. And across the board that's technically a good thing, it just means that, for me at least, it's not as fun to drive. The handling. The M3 is perfect straight off the bat, in fact arguably better than it should be. This one feels very good through corners, but I would not even say it holds a candle to how fun the M3 is to drive in GT Sport in particular. Now in the previous game there was no comparison. The E92 wasn't even close. Now they're much more close, which is an interesting difference between the two games in terms of how fast they are, but also how much fun they are, and the kind of top speed that they have, the kind of tuning that you can do. So the footing is much closer than it was. Ultimately, I prefer the M3, but if you do go for the M4, it has a lot to offer. So, of course, if you haven't checked out my review for the pace car version, which has some interesting differences, then of course check that one out as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.